I'm all for improving Jamal's schools. I'm also all for Jamal having all the same educational opportunities as Kevin. The problem is most Democrats are not.
Wait. Did you... Dog. You're not for improving his school. You just said he should go to another one. How are you going to say, school vouchers, hurt their school vouchers and make a charter school, and then be like, oh yeah, I'm all for it, improving his school. Like, no, you just said you weren't. You just said that wasn't the solution. I've been hovering over this for a while. I think I'll watch this.
Okay, so there's a video that is going around on Facebook and on YouTube. It's from ACT TV called Systemic Racism Explained. Makes some interesting arguments, and I thought it's worthwhile going through them a little bit. So we're going to play the video, we'll stop it, we'll discuss. This video is sponsored by the Benham Brothers' brand new course, Expert Ownership. You can learn to own a business without it owning you. Stick around to the end of the video to find out more details.
This is Jamal. Jamal is a boy who lives in a poor neighborhood. He has a friend named Kevin, who lives in a wealthy neighborhood. All of Jamal's neighbors are African American, and all of Kevin's neighbors are white. Because Jamal's school district is mostly funded by property taxes, his school is not very well funded. His classrooms are overcrowded, his teachers are underpaid, and he doesn't have access to high-quality tutors or extracurricular activities. Kevin's school district is also funded by property taxes, so his school is very well funded. His classrooms are never crowded, his teachers are very well paid, and he has access to high-quality tutors and lots of extracurricular activities.
So let's talk for a second about school.
By the way, I've actually seen this difference, right? I've gone to a school that was very well funded, and I've gone to a school that was not very well funded. A majority of the schools that I went to were well funded.
Policy. The reality is that if you wanted Jamal to be able to go to Kevin's school, what you'd want is something called school vouchers. You want people to be able to move away from their school districts. One of the chief reasons that Jamal is confined to his local public school is...
Also, this reason that he's giving is already dumb. I have to piss. But, before I go, this reason he's giving is already dumb, right? I'll explain it in short terms. The solution to, hey, this school is doing really bad and is really shitty isn't, just move all those kids that are in that school to another school, right? Because if everybody does that, then you overwhelm that school. Well, one, you just leave an area and you leave a school deserted, right? Which is, a fucking waste. And then two, you will overwhelm a system somewhere else. You will overwhelm that current system with a bunch of fucking kids, that need, that then you won't be able to fucking give, Timmy or whatever the fuck his name was, undivided attention and shit like that, and all these resources and shit. It has to get divided amongst all these other kids that you just brought from another school. But give me a second, I gotta piss. Yeah, exactly. Okay, that's a perfect way to explain it. If your room is dirty, you don't just fucking, move to like another room. You clean the fucking room.
Because of Democratic policy that has decided that you must go to school in the district where you live. And this is also why a lot of people have left lower income areas and moved out to higher income areas specifically for better public schools. So if you want Jamal to have the same educational opportunities as Kevin, perhaps you should have school vouchers for private schools, or perhaps you should have charter schools, which is what Mayor Bill de Blasio in New York is fighting against, or perhaps you should break the teachers' unions, which are costing a fortune, particularly on a disproportionate level in areas where they're not spending enough taxpayer dollars. So I'm all for improving Jamal's schools. I'm also all for Jamal having all the same educational opportunities as Kevin. The problem is most Democrats are not.
Wait. Did you... Dog. You're not for improving his school. You just said he should go to another one. How are you going to say, school vouchers, hurt their school vouchers and make a charter school, and then be like, oh yeah, I'm all for it, improving his school. Like, no, you just said you weren't. You just said that wasn't the solution. You just gave two solutions that were obvious deflections from actually improving the school itself.
Kevin and Jamal
Also, that teachers union shit is bullshit. Teachers unions do have issues, but that's not one of them.
live only a few streets away from each other. So how come they're growing up in such different worlds with such different opportunities for success? The answer has to do with America's history of systemic racism. To understand it better, let's look at what life was like for Kevin and Jamal's grandparents.
In order to understand what's going to happen in this video, you have to understand how systemic racism is being defined. Systemic racism is really a amorphous term. It could mean many things. It could mean that the institutions of today are racist, in which case everyone would oppose them. Or it could mean that all inequality...
So, the prison industrial system in America is very fucking racist. And, like, literally half of our country supports it. Like, a good fucking solid chunk. Literally, the Southern strategy was based around law and order and shit like that. It's part of the reason that even that Democrats are so moderate is because of the appeal to law and order that had to be done. Joe Biden's had to do it with the fucking crime bill. Like, no. Let me make sure I heard that right.
It could mean many things. It could mean that the institutions of today are racist, in which case everyone would oppose them. Or
yeah, so that's not true. There are institutions that are racist that exist today. And there are people that actively support them. Like, and not even in like small quantity. But I mean, okay.
Or it could mean that all inequality is explainable by racism, which of course is not sustainable. It's not a good argument.
That's all. So that's just disingenuous. Like that just doesn't make sense. It's not saying. So, saying systemic racism, right? Is the only reason for inequality, or saying that's the argument that they're trying to make. Is like this weird fucking like absolutism. Like, no, there are other reasons for inequality. Systemic racism is just one of them. It's a big factor, but it's not the fucking 100%. That's a very, I don't get it. It's like weird. It's like he's like defining his own reality. This motherfucker has the fucking reality gem and shit from Thanos and shit, or Thanos. Is it Thanos or Thanos? I think it's Thanos. And he's just fucking like defining reality as he sees it. Like, no, that's not how that works at all.
The argument that this video is going to try to make is that all of history has meaning. And that is true. History does have consequences for today. The problem is, as we'll see, the video tries to explain all inequality with reliance on history and no inequality with response to exacerbating levels of income inequality, exacerbating levels of single motherhood.
Exacerbating levels of income inequality. Why?
Personal
single motherhood. Why?
Decision making, or any of
personal decision making. Why?
The other variables that could come into creating the gaps we see today.
See, and this is like that's like the tongue-in-cheek, like little like racist shit too, is the person. That's the big one. The heavy individualism, right? The heavy individualism look when they look at these things, because if you boil it all down, right, and you say okay, and you just continue to ask why. It's pretty easy, right? To just continue to ask why, right? You say, oh, why? Oh, black people or blacks and Latinos are affected by this, and that, or shown to have, or shown to disproportionately commit crimes. Okay, why? Because the areas they live in and stuff like that are, low income, blah, 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 blah. Okay, why? And this and that. And then you go like, oh, it's personal decision making. Okay, why are a monolith of people making the same types of decisions then, right? And it comes down to either being what how they grew up, products of their environment, or it comes down to just being racist. But and typically there's also a deflect to culture. Yeah, exactly. And that's how like capitalism works in a sense. Like that's how like trying to heavily maintain the status quo works. Is you blame the individual at the bottom for for everything. And I'm not saying that like uh there isn't like aspects of individualism, right? But when you're looking at like a whole entire group of people, right, that are as a monolith being affected by these things, right? Or disproportionately being affected by these things, then you have to stop. You can't really look at like, oh, it's individualism, because it's not, right? Well, it's not unless you are just going to claim that blacks slash Latinos slash whatever are just genetically, predisposed and shit, to make bad decisions, be poor, or whatever. Um, Either that or you admit that there are environmental factors that change these things. Because even if you bring up the culture, right? It's the damn hip hop, right? It's like, okay, how? Because there are successful black people that listen to hip hop. There are successful white people that listen to hip hop, right? A majority of popular American culture is black culture, and people are still fucking successful. Oh yeah, and that's the point. That's the whole point. Is that they can't get away with saying they're genetically inferior. So you'll see all these arguments stop here, right? They don't like digging down, right? If you ask why, right, you're basically digging their grave for them. You get them to dig their grave. So they end up at the bottom, right? And you have two things, right? You either have they bury themselves by just having to admit they're racist, which they're not going to do, or they have to admit that they're fucking, or that's environmental factors that cause these things, right? Which means that they can be improved because our environment can be improved upon. But yeah, they can't get away. You can't get away. That's the point. They can't get away with just saying, "Oh, they're genetically inferior."
Decades after the Civil War, many government agencies started to draw maps dividing cities into sections that were either desirable or undesirable for investment. This practice was called redlining, and it usually blocked off entire black neighborhoods from access to private and public investment. Banks and insurance companies used these maps for decades to deny black people loans and other services based purely on race. Historically speaking, owning a home and getting a college education is the easiest way for an American family to build wealth. But when Jamal's grandparents wanted to buy a house, the banks refused because they lived in a neighborhood that was redlined. So Jamal's grandparents were not able to buy a home, and because colleges could prevent them from attending through legal segregation, their options for higher education were really scarce.
So let's talk about redlining. Redlining became illegal in the United States as early as 1968.
That's not early. That's not early. That was fucking like 60 years ago. Right? I'm not tripping, right? Oh, no. 80. It's 80. So it's like, yeah, still. That's still like, that's not like as early, like at all. Considering, even if you look at it based on like how old we are as a country. How old is America? Okay, Google. How old is America? Yeah. Okay, Google. Stop. That means that you subtract 80. That means that there's like, I mean, granted, shit was worse for certain periods of time before then, but do you think Ben thinks they're actually genetically inferior, or just trying to keep the system? Both. I'm gonna be real. I can't like. I can't look at a lot of his arguments and like the things that he says, right, and not think that at least to some degree he doesn't believe that like blacks and Latinos are just inferior to some degree, like to some core of his being. It's hard for me to convince myself that that's not the case, but I think it is a lot of, right, just trying to, hey, I think a lot of it is him just trying to what's it called? Thank you for the host, Gio. Uphold that system. Because the thing is that all these solutions he's giving, right, are things that can be implemented, so to speak, right, without actually taking away from the massive surplus, right, of wealth, right? When you talk about, or any government funding, when you talk about actually improving a school, that takes that takes money. You know what I'm saying? A school voucher, right? Or a charter school, in a sense, even. That's things that don't actually affect anyone at the top, which is why he's pushing them so hard. So, I mean, school vouchers is like, bro, whatever. It's like it's just a really bad argument. I mean, not to mention, not everybody can just do that either way. You got people who, if you're living in, let's say, like poverty, right, who are probably working like 9 to 5s or worse, right? Likely worse, like working some fucking crazy ass hours and shit, right, to support themselves and their families. And you're telling them that they gotta fucking drive, instead of actually having somebody invest in their area, they gotta fucking drive an hour or something to bring their kid to school in the morning, and an hour back, maybe possibly to their job and shit, and do all, like, no, because the buses aren't gonna do it. That's like one of the big things, is that if you do get moved to another school, right, you would have to have your parents take you, and then they have to pick you up.
Equal Credit Opportunity Act was followed by the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act of 1975.
To give you an example, right, when I started high school at a school that was really well funded, and this actually doesn't have anything to do with like so much financial status. It was just where we were living at the time. We actually lived in like a really nice house at the time, right? But my dad, after driving me the 45, I think it was like 45 minutes, right, in the morning, and then having to drive 45 minutes back, he was like, no, we can't do this. You know what I'm saying? Like, because then he had to pick me up and then bring me back, right? So he wasted, my dad's a small business owner, and he was at the time, right? So he wasted like what, a good like 3-4 hours of his day, just to pick me up. You know what I'm saying? Just to pick me up from school. Like, that's not, that time is way too valuable, especially if you're in low income situation.
Which was a predecessor to the Community Reinvestment Act, both of which were an attempt to ensure that people who are living in low-income minority neighborhoods could actually get loans. And these things were very effective. In 1992, researchers at the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston tried to look at the data. They collected information on some 30 variables related to lending decisions. They found that virtually all of the difference between minority and non-minority denial rates was explained by those variables. A reanalysis of that information found that black...
Yeah, that's the fucking point. Is that if you fucking shoot me in the leg, right? If you fucking shoot me in the leg, or in this case, right, you say, hey, you can't have this, right? We're not even gonna let you run the race, to fucking have to try to win this prize, right? And then you fucking shoot me in the leg and say that, okay, now you're good. Now you can do whatever you want, right? Or you fucking bust my shins and my kneecaps and then say, okay, it's all good now. You can run the race now. Then yeah, I'm not gonna fucking win. I'm not gonna be able to get it. Or at least not as easy as not as easy as everybody else. Especially if you don't reinvest in like the healing process. Okay. Keep in mind, by the way, right? This is me talking. This is me just speaking from, what's it called? Just general awareness. You know what I mean? I grew up middle class, so all of these things is just like general awareness and like empathy and stuff like that that I have just from observing and actually doing research and actually asking questions why, like stuff like this. You know what I mean? I'm not just speaking from like firsthand experience or something like that. I'm not or anecdotal experience. There is no anecdotal experience in my case.
Owned banks were actually lending to white-owned businesses at higher rates than they were lending to black-owned businesses. Furthermore, if it seemed that banks were discriminating against black borrowers on the basis of they needed to have higher credit qualifications, what you would see is lower default rates from black clients of banks, from people who are borrowing money from banks in the black community. There are zero studies that show any of this. So the bottom line is this. Redlining was an evil and awful policy. It was made illegal in the 1960s. By the 1980s, the banks were not lending at disproportionate rates. In fact, if you look at among different communities, as Thomas Sowell has pointed out, Asian Americans get loans more easily than white Americans. That does not mean the banks are being racist toward white Americans on behalf of Asian Americans. When it comes to college education, it is also worth noting that, yes, there were many universities that were segregated. There were many universities that did not allow black people to attend. Since the 1970s, the most prominent measure that has been used in order to admit black students to major universities across the country has been affirmative action, which actively discriminates against people who are not black in favor of black applicants, specifically by ensuring.
By the way, the largest beneficiaries of affirmative action are white females. And on top of that, these black people still have to qualify. Like they're not just letting fucking any just random fucking black dude off the street just go into college over, some kid that, was studying and so hard and all this shit. Like, no. These are kids, these are black students that worked as hard, if not harder, that get into these schools and stuff. Is it discriminatory? Maybe. I mean, if you look at it at just the scope of all the black students, like I said, though, the largest beneficiaries of that were white women.
That black applicants don't have to have the same test scores or GPAs in order to get into those same schools. So
that's not true.
Not only has policy been corrected, it's been overcorrected in these areas.
Kevin's grandparents, on the other hand, got a low-interest loan to buy their first house and got accepted into a handful of top universities, which traditionally only accepted white students. This opened up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids.
The basic assumption of this video is that if your grandparents are rich in the United States, this means that you are rich in the United States. And that if your grandparents are poor in the United States, that means that you are poor
yes.
in the United States. This is factually untrue. The reality is that income changes over time, that there are an enormous number of people in the United States by percentage who are able to rise from poor to middle class and their children from middle class to wealthy. The biggest problem that we have in the United States right now is not a historic wealth gap. The biggest problem we have is an income gap in the United States. And there's some fascinating statistics surrounding this. There was a Harvard study recently that showed that black males who are growing up in the same household incomes as white males were actually underperforming their white male counterparts, even in high-income neighborhoods. You would think that all of this might imply racism, except for one inconvenient fact in the study. Black women who are growing up in the same high-income neighborhoods as white women growing up in the same high-income neighborhoods, black women were performing at exactly the same or higher rates than white women in those neighborhoods, which would suggest that there are other factors at play other than simple racism. Furthermore, the basic idea that most wealth in the United States is inherited and that millionaires are really only millionaires because their parents were millionaires, that really isn't true either. The vast majority of millionaires and billionaires are people whose parents were not millionaires, and
That's a fucking lie. There's no way that that's true.
billionaires. Chris Hogan, who's a black financial expert, he did a survey of 10,000 people, and what he found was that of those 10,000 people, 74% of millennials believed millionaires inherited their money, 52% of baby boomers did, but only 21% of millionaires received any inheritance at all. Just 16% inherited more than $100,000. Only 3% received an inheritance at or above $1 million. In reality, the best path toward wealth in this country is income mobility, not inherited wealth.
This opened
What is income mobility to you? What is income mobility to you? Income mobility is inherited. For example, I'm in a position where I have a lot of income mobility. Where I work now, right? I have the opportunity to make a lot of money. If it is not for me, right? I also have the possibility of working for my father and making a lot of money. Like, that income mobility was inherited. Even the job that I have now, I wouldn't have if I wasn't taught, because I work at a dealership, right? I work at a dealership, right? So I have to know how to talk to people. You know what I'm saying? I have to have a decent handle as far as like intelligence and stuff like that is concerned, right? Like, these are things that I might not possibly be able to do had I not grown up the way that I did and had the things that I did growing up. Like, my income mobility was, if we're talking from a legal sense, was very inherited. I don't get why he just separated that from wealth itself. Wealth is income mobility.
up a wealth of opportunities that they were able to pass on to their kids and grandkids. Even as late as the 1980s, an investigation into the Atlanta real estate market showed that banks were more willing to lend to low-income white families than to middle or upper-income African-American families. As a result, today, for every $100 of wealth held by a white family, black families have $5.04.
That's fucking ridiculous.
A 2017 study confirms that redlining is still affecting home values in major cities like Chicago today. This explains how Kevin and Jamal inherited vastly different circumstances.
As it turns out, there are some complicating factors that don't get cited in this video with regard to this data. The Federal Reserve Board economists tried to explain that this data did not take account of differences that were not income-based, things like liabilities, employment history, credit record, and other relevant variables that should have been considered. It should not be particularly surprising that discrimination in the past has impact on the actual income of people who are living in the areas that were denied loans. That shouldn't be a major surprise. But that is not the only disparity, obviously. That New York Times piece they are citing says, quote, they estimate the maps account for 15 to 30% of the overall gaps in segregation and home ownership that they find between the highest risk area and the second highest risk areas. Those were the ones that were being classified. The truth is that when it comes to redlining, you have to look at the gradations as well. There is always going to be a difference in the availability of loans to people who are living in the highest risk areas as opposed to the people who are in the very lowest risk areas. Another factor is that if history does make a difference,
that's still the point. Like, that's the whole idea, is that they were listed as high risk, and then nothing was actually done as far as reinvestment into those communities to make them less high risk afterwards, after you already fucking shot them in the foot.
difference than if you are denied loans in a particular area. And if there's less money in those areas, and as crime goes up, and as property taxes kick in, there's not enough money to take, and as schools get worse, obviously that's going to continue to have effect in that particular area. That doesn't mean the same people are living in that area who always lived in that area, or that people who grew up in that area in 1960 necessarily have to live in that area, or that their grandkids have to live in that area in 2020.
Unfortunately, the story doesn't end there. A big part of systemic racism.
Okay, but this just goes back into the whole, like, oh, my room is dirty, I'm gonna fucking buy another room shit. Like, that still doesn't actually fix the fucking problem. If people can, they can just move. That's such a shit argument. I don't even know, like, how he, being the fucking, I'm actually fucking commentator he is, thinks that that's a good argument.
Racism is implicit bias. These are prejudices in society that people are not aware that they have.
Oh, you're homeless? Just move into a home. Like, the fuck?
One of the big problems with implicit bias, it is very, very difficult to quantify, identify, and studies that supposedly determine that your implicit bias results in real-world action are deeply flawed. Implicit bias assessment tests, for example, are so significantly flawed they are virtually unusable.
Let's go back to Kevin and Jamal. Against all odds, Jamal manages to be the...
I actually can't comment on that. I'm not sure if implicit bias tests are actually, like,
only
effective or not. I would have to, like, maybe take one and assess that for myself.
Student from his high school to get accepted into a great university. The same one that Kevin and his high school friends are attending. But after Kevin and Jamal both graduate, Jamal notices that his resume isn't drawing as much interest as Kevin's, even though they graduated from the same program with the exact same GPA. Unfortunately for Jamal, studies show that resumes with white-sounding names get twice as many callbacks as identical resumes with black-sounding names.
The research is actually a lot more interesting than what is being portrayed in this video. There are several studies here. There was one famous study that was done that suggested that first name differentiation was indeed being used by employers. So if your name was Lakeisha, for example, this is the name that is actually used in the study, Lakeisha versus Greg, that you are less likely to get a callback. There was another study that showed a historically black last name like Washington or Jefferson provided no actual difference.
Oh my fucking god. Washington and Jefferson aren't historically fucking black names. What? Dog. Those are fucking European as shit. Bro. Is he for real? Did he really just say Washington and Jefferson are fucking historically black last names? Oh my fucking god. This dude he's insane. Yes, they're both presidents. They're both fucking popular white US presidents. George Washington and fucking, actually, is it, I forgot, no, it's Andrew Jackson. Thomas Jefferson. Oh my god, I got a fucking piss. That actually fucking, like, made me wig. Oh my god. So, something interesting about those presidents, right? And this goes into why Washington and fucking Jefferson, right, are historically black names, is that something very, very fucking common was to name the slaves or give slaves the last name of the fucking owners. And just coincidentally, George Washington and I believe Thomas Jefferson both owned slaves. I can double check. I know George Washington did, because his fucking grill was made from slave teeth. Fucking Jefferson. I know one of them actually didn't. Okay, Thomas Jefferson had a slave wife. Let's see. That's great. He was an opponent of slavery. Okay, yeah. So he actually was the one that was an opponent of slavery. Regardless, it's a very white name. So if you're a white slave owner named fucking Jefferson, then your slaves were typically named Jefferson. For example, my name is Mikhail Heinz Andujar, right? Heinz isn't a fucking historically black name. Neither is fucking Andujar, right? Even though I'm Dominican, it's a Spanish name. If I look at I can bring up my 23andMe, right? And I'm like fucking 0.01% fucking Spanish, right? Meaning it's way more likely that my Dominican ancestors were African that were owned by Spanish conquistadors and had the same last name than it is that, fucking Andujar is a historically black name, especially considering I can find the fucking city named Andujar. But okay.
Differentiation from historically employers. So if your name was Lakeisha, for example, this is the name that is actually used in the study.
I just want to hear him say it
versus
again.
Greg, that you are less likely to get a callback. There's another study that showed a historically black last name like Washington or Jefferson provided no actual difference.
How about Beloye, right? Or fucking like an actual, African last name or something like that. A fucking, I know Beloye is one because I have a coworker with that last name. Like, dog.
Differentiation from historically white names, like Greenberg, for example. So if your name was Steve Greenberg,
bro, those are fucking indistinguishable. You're telling me that if you saw a fucking Jefferson and Greenberg, you wouldn't think those were both fucking white names, or at least European origin names?
Versus Steve Jefferson, you're just as likely to get a callback as Steve Jefferson. What that suggests, and this was confirmed.
Oh my god! Yeah, but that's still with a white first name. That's still Steve Jefferson, bro. That's like
subsequent studies.
All right, bro. All right, Ben.
Is that the actual issue here is a question of class discrimination, not an issue of race discrimination. In other words, the reason that people are discriminating against Lakeisha as opposed to against Steve Johnson or Steve Washington.
So class discrimination isn't a problem? Even if that was the case, right? I mean, and this is the thing, is that he's right, it is class discrimination, but it's class discrimination based on race, right? They assume because of your race that you are lower class. So regardless, even if it wasn't race related, that's still a fucking issue that would affect them. That would affect you racially. Even if it was class discrimination, right? As its own separate thing, if companies are assuming that black names are lower class, then that means it's racial discrimination.
Is because people are actually using the first name as a stand-in for social class. They are figuring that if you were named Lakeisha, it's because you probably came from a more impoverished background.
Yes, that's racial discrimination. They're using he literally says it. He says that they're using their first name as a stand-in for their class. Yes.
Now, this is
classism, and by the way, classism is still bad.
Not restricted to the black community. This happens in the Jewish community as well. If you get an applicant and the applicant's name is Ben, you might treat that applicant different than if that person's name is Benjamin. You might treat a Menachem different than you treat a Mike. And that is because you are trying to read into the person your perceptions of culture or perceptions of class, not really perceptions of race. That was really
spicy.
Community. This happens in the Jewish. That is because you are trying to read into the person.
Wait, hold up.
Your
I need to hear that again.
Person's name is Benjamin. You might treat a Menachem different than you treat.
I like that. A Menachem. That was nice.
And that is because you are trying to read into the person your perceptions of culture or perceptions of class, not really perceptions of race. That's really, really important when you look at these particular studies and suggest that racial discrimination rather than class distinctions are at the basis of whatever hiring discrimination is happening here.
Okay. Implicit bias is one of the reasons why the black unemployment rate is twice the rate of white unemployment.
Well, this tends to neglect one key factor. What did you major in? What did you study? It turns
Oh my. What can you major in? What the fuck can you study if you can't afford to go to college? If you can't qualify for a college because you grew up in a really shitty school, right? And you weren't able to get a solid education. What could you major in? What could you study? Not saying, and I'm not even looking at this in the same way, like, because I think regardless, right? Regardless, trade schools and shit are more accessible. Uh, Not saying that's like, like the end all solution, but it's definitely a good route to go. Is you could do like, like trade school, that type of shit. Get in a lot of cases too. There's a lot of companies too that'll pay for your trade, but it still limits you, right? As a person, right? As like a person coming out of that situation to, oh no, the opportunity for you to be, let's say, for example, my little brother wants to be a fucking shit, I forgot. He wants to be a biologist, if I remember, right? So my brother wants to be a fucking biologist, right? And he's in the position where that's actually an opportunity for him, right? Where if he applies himself, right? If he does these things, if he does this, and that, right? He can actually do that. There are people who, with the same amount of application that my brother has, will not be able to do that, right? They will have to work significantly harder to make that happen. And at a certain point, you reach, oh, you can actually work harder to make this happen, and oh, this is physically impossible for a human to actually, for not saying black or anyone, but a human to even, feasibly achieve. Right? So, and this is with my brother being like, like me, Latino, black Latino. So it's like I'm not getting this point here of like, what did you study and shit like that. It's like, bro, that's kind of the point, right? Is that the opportunity for somebody to study these things, right, isn't being granted equally across the board.
Turns out that people who major in education aren't going to do as well as people who major in engineering. According to research from the Center on Education and the Workforce at Georgetown University, this is a quote from PBS, African American college students are more likely to pursue majors that lead to low-paying jobs, setting up many for future debt and underemployment. Over time, these occupational choices contribute to the wealth and opportunity gap between whites and blacks that spans generations. Anthony Carnival, who's the director of the program, says basically African Americans have been going to the right church but sitting in the wrong pew. In a way, they are using education to climb the social and economic ladder, but they're being steered toward majors that will make them low earners. So, in other words, there are several confounding factors that are not being taken into account in this video. 1, what college did you go to? 2, what did you major in? And 3, what kind of job did you get afterward?
You can see evidence of systemic racism in.
I wonder if that's true. I think it, even still, I'm still like, it doesn't answer the kind of why of like, if that's the case, then what is the reason then that blacks are being steered towards lower paying majors? Fact check the study. All right, let me see. He says all of it here, so hold on. Here it is, right here. Is it just gonna be dark like this? Or like, okay, whatever. Setting up many for future debt and unemployment. Basically, yeah. African Americans make up only small of some of the highest paying executive STEM in business. So then, what are they studying? For example, the majority of black women in STEM typically study biology, the lowest paying of the science discipline. And like that's like, and this is like part of the shitty thing. So where people talk about like where like capitalism in a sense kills certain like aspects of like, it kills specific aspects of like science and art and shit like that, because basically it ends up being this thing of like, oh, it doesn't make money, it does not make money, so it is there inherently then less valuable, right? And because we live in this system, right, then you end up with shit like this where like, yeah, you fucking get into biology and it's like the fucking lowest paying of the science discipline, despite it literally being the study of like us in a sense. Among engineers, most black men study civil engineering, the lowest paying in that sector. I wonder why. They're overrepresented in service-oriented fields, humanities, education, and social work. Huh. Damn. It's almost like black people that go to college maybe think about reinvesting in their community. Humanities, education, and social work. Damn. That seems like these are people that are actually like trying to help out. Well, yeah, that's what I'm explaining here. It could be something along those lines. I don't know though. Now, the STEM one is confusing to me. I wonder. Actually, I'm actually like I'm wondering why. Like there are more black people that are into like, let's say like biology, or more engineers into civil engineering. I mean, so no, you're good. I know there's a delay. Uh, it could possibly be too that these majors cost more money too, right? So you can still be, let's say, like in like the STEM program or like qualify for certain things. And if, let's say, engineering, right, or like, which it does, engineering is not only harder in that sense, right, but it's more expensive. You have to be in school longer for certain majors and stuff. So it could be a thing where even still you're still having some of that inequity when it comes to how like the amount of resources that these people have, even if they get into college, you know, uh, that they might not be looking at doing this many years. You know what I'm saying? Or it could just be personal interest, which would be interesting to see. I wonder why, black women in STEM typically study biology, and then like black men, especially considering that these are gender specific. Like there's actually like a fucking like, dimorphism here, between black women in STEM typically studying biology, and then black men studying civil engineering. Which the civil engineering one, it's a stretch, but both of these could also be contributed to like to reinvesting in community in a sense. But these ones, humanities, education, and social work, right? That seems a lot like these are people trying to reinvest into their communities, like reinvest their own capital, like their own human capital into their communities. Which I think is great. And I think it sucks that, they don't make good money despite that. You have strong community-based values, enter into college majors. Yeah, okay, so yeah. Indicates that African Americans who have strong community-based values, right, tend to enter in, community-based values, huh? Enter into college majors that reflect those values. Damn, so it's almost like, right, when you live within capitalism, right, that promotes heavy individualism, even when you go into the higher majors, if you do not have an individualist mindset towards that, then you therefore will make less money. because that's how this works. Interesting. Despite compromising just 12% of the population, African Americans are 20% of all community organizers. Huh. Damn. I mean, that's easily explained. You got people that are in shit communities. They want to make their they actually want to make their communities better. It makes sense. I don't even fault, let's say, any other race maybe for not doing so, right? Especially if their communities aren't as fucking shat on, as a whole. If your community is doing good, right? Then what reason does 12% of your population, what business do they have being 20% of all community organizers? That's cool though. Here it is. The center also points out that the majority of college-educated African Americans earn their degrees from 2-year institutions or open admission 4-year colleges and universities, which, by the way, are cheaper. 70% of African Americans who graduate from college attended an open admission school. Yeah, that's a money thing. With a few exceptions, these institutions not only have limited majors and course offerings, but also lack personnel and academic resources for consistent mentorship. So the reason why is here. And he just refused to say it. The reason why that's happening is actually here in the fucking article. I'm happy you told me to fact check this. Yeah. Yeah, there's a $4 million difference in earnings between a 4-year degree in early childhood education and petroleum engineering over an entire year. Yeah, because if you're a fucking petroleum engineer, then you're a big part of the machine. You're part of the big boys. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? They send your ass to the fucking Middle East after they just bombed the fucking a couple villages and shit to secure some oil rigs. You know what I mean? You're doing your fucking calculations over a fucking carcass. But, yeah, so that's actually very interesting. Is that this, yeah, the reason why is in here, and he doesn't give the reason why. He doesn't say anything about it. He just moves on, which I mean, I'll fault him for it, but I mean, I understand, I guess, for the sake of making a video, considering some of his videos are like hours long, like this one, that's an hour and 23 minutes long. He has no excuse not to explain himself. So never mind. Yeah, I 100% give him flack for that.
Every area of life. The disparities in family wealth, incarceration rates, political representation, and education are all examples of systemic racism.
Now we reach the crux of the matter. The basic idea here is that any inequality can be chalked up to systemic racism. We are now ghost hunting.
Bro, what do you mean ghost hunting? You literally even said that all these reasons were part and parcel to some type of racial discrimination.
Of systemic racism.
You admitted it yourself.
The basic idea here is that
you literally said, "Oh, they're gonna try to say it's racism." Oh, so yeah, it's actually this thing, right? That is that they're doing influenced by race. But nah, that's not racism. It's just this thing, even though it's influenced by their race. It's not racism. Like
any inequality can be chalked up to systemic racism. We are now ghost hunting. Notice. They've said nothing in this video about incarceration. Nothing about incarceration. The simple assumption is that if more black people percentage-wise are arrested than white people, that must be due to systemic racism and not due to the number of crimes being committed by individuals who make a decision to
he's gonna hit him with the 1350, baby.
Commit a crime. When it comes to representation, the truth is there are many, many black Americans in Congress. We've had a black president of the United States.
Woo!
People choosing to run and people choosing to vote. That is an aspect of American freedom. And when it comes to education, there are plenty of affirmative action programs that exist at virtually every major university. In fact, there are entire university systems like the University of California that have gotten rid of the SAT and the ACT as admissions criteria specifically because they weren't allowing enough minority students to attend. So to attribute all inequality to systemic racism is simply to say that everything you don't like must be due to systemic racism.
Unfortunately, the biggest challenge with systemic racism is that there's no single person or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve.
Obunga was president.
So what can you do?
Actually, that looks like a very like low fucking poly Obama right here. Like,
Single person
oh, never mind. He doesn't have hair.
or entity responsible for it, which makes it very hard to solve. So what can you do? The first thing you can do is work towards becoming more aware of your own implicit biases.
Wait, what are the? Wait, I want to read these actually. Muslims are terrorists. Asians can't drive. Americans are fat. So here's the thing about this one. This is actually like one that's not even race related, right? And that's actually true. Like, we actually are like the most obese fucking country on the planet. So like I mean, I guess it's a broad generalization regardless, and it is an implicit bias. But like that that's yeah. I mean, and here's the thing, right? Is that even a couple of these, right? Black people, for example, black people are good at sports, right? There's like still like environmental reasons and shit for this. You know what I mean? There's environmental reasons for like things like this, if you believe them, right? Really? I mean, really? I wonder. You know what I'm saying? Jews are stingy with money, like, and here's the thing, right? Obviously, it's not good to assume any of these things, right? This one is just like, well, like no, but like these ones, for example. Obviously, you can't assume them, but they might actually be like issues and shit. And this is the thing, right? Is that I'm not like offended by like things like this, right? These things don't offend me, right? If they're untrue and if they're completely untrue, right? Then yeah, then they're just fucking like shit biases and shit. But if there is like, let's say like reasons behind certain of these things, if they are somewhat true or something like that, you can prove they're true, right? Then it's about getting down to the reasons about like behind it in a sense. You know what I mean? It might be that, you know, maybe culturally, Jewish people are more frugal or something. It might be that like, you know, maybe for specific reasons, Asians can't, you know, Asians are like worse drivers or something. And that, I mean, and like I said, I don't believe any of these are true, with the exception of like Americans are fat and maybe black people are good at sports. I will say, I mean, it depends on what sports you're looking at. When it comes to like certain sports, and that's like where I will say like there are genetic differences. There has to be like some type of like genetic differences as far as like races and stuff, because you have the Olympics, for example, right, is the best example of genetics being the thing that trumps everything, right? If you wanted any fucking better there's no better justification for eugenics or some shit like that than the Olympics. And you'll see there's like, oh, there's white people win certain sports, Asian people win certain sports disproportionately, black people win different sports disproportionately, right? And these are typically all people that are all training just as hard and to some degree, right, have the same like level of like resources or access to the same level of resources and stuff like that, right? So it's like you have this thing where it's like, yeah, you do have people that are like on, in general, a kind of equal playing field. Yeah, and that's the thing. But like I said, the Olympics is like everyone's like kind of on an equal playing field, right, as far as resources and access to such. But if you're at the point that you've made it to the Olympics, right? And then from there, it really is just kind of like, you know, I can't really like look at somebody and be like, oh, that person trained that much harder than somebody else who also made it into the fucking Olympics. You know what I'm saying? So at that point, it comes down, what does it come down to? You know, environment or genetics. A lot of things that are genetic, you know, are environmental and stuff like that too. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. These types of things aren't. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, these types of things just aren't. Do I play sports? No. That's my thing. Like, I'm not good at sports. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not. I suck straight ass at any sport that I've played. I mean, granted, I'm not saying I couldn't be good at one. Like I'm 6'2". Actually, I think like 6'3" now. I'm 6'3", right? What's funny is I actually have a gene, right, for muscle composition that's most common in power athletes. I have a ridiculous metabolism, right? I eat probably worse than a typical American, right? But despite my age, despite me having grown past a certain point, right, my metabolism stays really fucking active. And just burn shit away. I'm assuming one of these days. Everyone tells me that one of these days, people were saying that when I hit like fucking like 18 and 20, that it was gonna go away. I'm 21 now and it still hasn't, but I think it'll catch up to me eventually.
Aware of your own implicit biases.
We should always, as decent people, be re-examining our own biases and trying to wipe out bad thoughts we may be having about other people. But the idea that something as vague as you had a bad thought about a group is now responsible for the income inequality between black and white is sort of an absurd.
No, that's not what they were trying to. That's not the point they were trying to make. That's just a small like section of it that is used to reinforce the current problems, and possibly maybe perpetuate them, or justify reasons to perpetuate them in the first place.
Absurd contention in the absence of any available evidence.
What are some prejudices that you might hold that you're not aware of? Second, let's acknowledge that the consequences of slavery and Jim Crow laws are still affecting access to opportunity today.
It is certainly plausible that slavery and Jim Crow have affected how people's paths have gone in life and the circumstances.
Yes, it certainly is plausible, Ben.
Of their birth. But the question is, how much? If we are going to change policy, and if we are going to effectuate change, shouldn't we be focused more on what are the bad policies today that specifically are keeping people down, and what behaviors can we change today to make our opportunities better, rather than focusing in on slavery or Jim Crow?
That's the point. The point isn't to just focus on slavery and Jim Crow. It's to say, hey, slavery and Jim Crow, right, caused a lot of fuckery. Let's focus on... it's like he's agreeing with me at this point. Let's focus on changing these policies and shit. Like, maybe reinvesting into some of these communities and shit that have been affected by such disproportionately.
Fact is that even if you buy into the entire narrative of systemic racism promoted by this video, it changes nothing, and the video is even acknowledging as much.
As a result, we should support systemic changes that create more equal opportunities for everyone. Increasing public school funding and making it independent from property taxes would be a great start. So
that would be a great start, by the way.
The poor and wealthy districts can receive equal access to resources.
The suggestion that simply pouring money into public schools is somehow going to be the solution has been belied by nearly every independent study ever done of public education. Obviously, we should be spending more on schools where not enough spending is going on, where there aren't school books.
Let's see. I wonder if he actually put a link to that. Okay, no. He hasn't put anything. He didn't put anything about any studies that said pouring more money into schools, doesn't help them.
Books, or there aren't enough desks. But the real problem that's existing in educational performance has very little to do with income and a lot more to do with the access to education.
He's gonna bring up teachers unions again, I think.
Opportunity provided in homes. If you have a single family home, it is very difficult for mom to be able to help with homework. If you don't allow kids to go to better schools outside their neighborhood, rather than simply pouring money into failed neighborhood schools, then you're not really granting opportunity.
That's like a really fucking brutalistic way to look at it, or nihilistic way to look at it. Oh yeah, bruh, that's just a failed school. Just, for the motherfuckers that are stuck there, just let them fail, bro. Just let them continue to fail there. Putting more money into it isn't gonna help. Which, by the way, I don't think that's true. I don't think that that's actually like been maligned or something like that by like every fucking independent study. I would have to. I gotta do my own research, I guess now. Damn it, he tricked me into doing my fucking own research, bro. Tricked me into making myself more woke. But typically, right, if you do actual like funding, which is one, making sure the teachers are better taken care of. That's another thing. That's a big thing. Is making sure you're not just giving the teachers more laptops or some shit, right? Actually taking care of the teachers, actually giving them a support system, right? And then on top of that, giving them all the resources they need to function. It really is centered around the teachers. It's around giving the teachers and then also giving the students what they need to succeed.
Systemic problems require systemic solutions. Luckily, we're all part of the system, which means that we all have a role to play in making it better. Peace.
It's easy enough to say that we all have a role in making the system better, but when you suggest very few practical solutions other than rote democratic policies that have been failed nearly every time they've tried, it makes it difficult to believe this isn't just a political ploy rather than an argument in favor of bettering individual human lives. To deny the effects of history would be idiotic. History obviously has consequences. And to deny that racism exists would be similarly idiotic. But to attribute every problem in American life to racism or inequity is to be foolish and counterproductive and not to make the world a better place. For more on...
They didn't do that, though. They didn't say every single problem was a result, like every single problem of inequity or anything like that. Like, they didn't say any of that.
On a lot of these topics, go check out my...
They didn't say that, like, inequity and systemic racism are, 100% of the world's problems and shit. That's not what they said at all. They just said it was a problem that needs reform.
Brand new book, How to Destroy America in 3 Easy Steps, all about the attempt to divide Americans by suggesting that American philosophy, culture, and history are responsible for all wrongs in the modern...
I'll tell you what, bro. You can clip this if you want. If at any point I ever hit like 1,000 subs, right? At 1,000 subs, I'll read any fucking Ben Shapiro book. I'll put a fucking voter poll up. And I will fucking read one of his books. And review and post a review on it. On my YouTube channel and on my Facebook. Other than that though, man, it is 2:44 a.m. where I'm at. I gotta go to work tomorrow. So, well, not even tomorrow, today. So thank you for hopping in, Fatal. I hope to see you here. I'll probably be doing the same thing tomorrow. I used to do gameplay, but it's easier to keep my mind sharp than it is to keep my gaming skills sharp, and watching me suck at Apex is just not entertaining. I don't really think this is either, but I think it is more so entertaining. So other than that, man, you have a great night, and I think I'll see you tomorrow. Or I guess later tonight. But peace.